We've had so many requests to look at overall top 12 rankings, not for underdog drafts. These aren't going to be best ball. These are for your casual redraft league. So this is going to be you're submitting your starting lineup each and every week. You have access to the waiver wire. And of course, you need to be making massive adjustments with your overall draft strategy and how we construct our roster. So specifically for these rankings, it's going to be for leagues where you're starting one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex. Now, the more flex spots you add in, the more you're going to be wanting to push wide receivers up these rankings. But nonetheless, let's start it off with a wide receiver at 1. We will have Justin Jefferson here. I mean, it doesn't matter the format that you're playing, and I guess if it was super flex, it'd be a little different. But Jefferson should be the top dog off the board. Nobody gives you the same floor-ceiling combination that you're seeing. Justin Jefferson's coming off what was truly a historic season. If we are looking at all wide receivers through NFL history, at least dating back to 2000, that's where this data from RotoViz comes from. You are seeing Justin Jefferson with the best wide receiver season we've ever seen from a 23-year-old. He goes out there and averages about 111 receiving yards on a per game basis. This is more than any wide receiver we've ever seen. I mean, the next best guy is at 99. Nobody else has been able to get to 100. Yes, he's ahead of Calvin Johnson on this list. Yes, he's ahead of Randy Moss on this list. Yes, he's ahead of Odell. He's ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. We've never seen this before, and he could get even better this next season. Now, of course, there are some positives. There are some negatives here. I would say the negative being you do add in Jordan Addison to this offense, and you have TJ Hawkinson fully implemented this next season. So we may see the target share go down slightly for Justin Jefferson in 2023. But even if this target share goes down from being 26, 27% down to 24, 25%, you could still see Justin Jefferson having a much better season overall with the increased efficiency of this offense based off their new weapons. And more importantly, the touchdown rate you should expect with Justin Jefferson. We know touchdown rate is the most volatile statistic in fantasy football, and he was only down at 4.6 this past season. If this goes up to 8, 9%, which is entirely possible, we may see Justin Jefferson pull the Cooper Kupp from a few years ago, where he leads the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. Now, in my mind, really the only other player to have a shot at doing that this next season is going to be Jamar Chase, where if you're looking at Chase, I understand he wasn't a true league-winning option this past year. I mean, he was at the very top of drafts. He missed some time, so I know people are frustrated with Jamar Chase, but in reality, if you look at the per game numbers, you had exactly what you wanted to see from Jamar Chase in year 2. Jamar Chase increased his volume. Volume. We know that's what's king. He went from averaging 7.5 targets per game as a rookie up to 11 targets per game as a second-year player. From a per-game perspective, Jamar Chase had a target share of 31%. That means essentially every time Joe Burrow goes to throw, you have a 33% chance that that ball's going to Jamar Chase. Out of every 3 pass attempts, Jamar Chase is getting one of those from one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL. If we're looking at wide receivers that have comparable year 1 and year 2 seasons to Jamar Chase, really the only guys you can find are elite level names, right? Michael Thomas, who was the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. AJ Green, a possible Hall of Famer. Justin Jefferson, arguably on track to be the best wide receiver of all time. So yeah, Jamar Chase, he just looks like the next version of Justin Jefferson, right? So I think they have to be in their top tier no matter what. Now, going over to 3, this is where it'd be different, right? On Underdog, you'll never see me take Christian McCaffrey at pick 3 just because wide receivers will be dramatically pushed up in those Underdog drafts where we want running back values in the middle rounds. In your casual redraft league, however, you're going to get phenomenal wide receiver values in the middle round. So here, I'm going to go Christian McCaffrey at 3. Now, with CMC, he's not the same level player that he was in 2019, right? You go back to 2019 Christian McCaffrey, this is someone dropping 400 freaking fantasy points. This is someone that is averaging about 9 targets per game, 18 carries per game, and 150 total yards per game. Now, you're never going to see that again from Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey, instead of being used as the only option in his entire offense as he was in Carolina, is more so going to be in a running back by committee with Elijah Mitchell. You kind of see this if you go ahead and look at the player props right now on Underdog Fantasy going into this next season. The rushing yards marked for Elijah Mitchell versus Christian McCaffrey, they're not that far apart. Now, does this mean CMC is not elite? Oh, no, of course Christian McCaffrey is elite. What makes him elite is going to be his usage as a pass catcher. That's going to be the main thing that we're looking at. And just to go back to the fact that he's in a committee, if you look at the 4 games CMC played with Elijah Mitchell this past season, he went from averaging about 15.5 rushing attempts per game down to about 10.5 rushing attempts per game. So you have one red flag in that he is in a pseudo committee. You have another red flag that he is older than he's ever been. And generally, you're not that excited about drafting running backs going into year 6, going into year 7. But nonetheless, nobody has the same ceiling that we have seen from Christian McCaffrey time and time again. I mean, he's been a straight up true league winner with over a 20% win rate multiple times in his NFL career. Now, our next guy that we are going to have higher here than we would in underdog drafts will be Travis Kelce. The reason being is in your casual redraft league, you are able to take advantage of your league mates. And I hate to put it that way. I hate to say that, but in general, your league mates are going to let you have some crazy wide receiver and crazy running back values later on in the draft. Like if you go look at ESPN ADP right now, you're seeing that you can get Calvin Ridley at the 5-6 turn. You're seeing in some of these drafts, you can get J.K. Dobbins in the 6th, 7th round. Those are price points that would never occur on Underdog. So I feel like we kind of have to grab our wide receivers early, but in your casual redraft league, especially if you're only starting 2 wide receivers and 1 flex, you are highly incentivized to go through and grab a true difference-making player in the form of Travis Kelce round 1. With Kelce, I'm a little bit concerned about his age. Not going to lie, this is the first time that we've been saying this. I drafted a lot of Kelce in 2022, drafted a lot of Kelce in 2021, but he's now going to be 34. He's by far and away the oldest player that you are going to consider inside the top 100 picks of fantasy football drafts that is not a quarterback. Now, he is showing no signs of slowing down. The only statistical decline you're going to find is maybe with his air yards per game, but in reality, it doesn't really matter because the man just prints fantasy football points. Now, our next guy is going to be someone that we would actually take at 3 in those underdog drafts. It's going to be Tyreek Hill. Now with Tyreek Hill, 3 straight seasons where he's been a mid-wide receiver 1 or better in fantasy. This past season, he had over 100 yards per game. He averaged 10 targets per game. And what was so impressive is he did this in a season where Tua was riddled with injuries. If you go through and look at the games with and without Tua for Tyreek Hill, it's a night and day difference. With Tua, Tyreek Hill averages 108 receiving yards per game. With Tua, he averages about 10.5 targets per game. Now, while Tua was injured, these numbers go dramatically down. He goes from about 110 receiving yards per game down to 75. He goes from about 10.5 targets per game down to about 8.5. I am assuming Tua is going to be healthy this next season. I know everybody thinks because he's had 2 concussions before, that means he is doomed to have another one. I don't think it works that way. Yes, if Tua gets hit, he is at more risk than another quarterback, but nonetheless, I'm still fine drafting Tyreek Hill. And our next guy in Cooper Kupp, I think you could make a strong argument to have him higher. Cooper Kupp led the NFL this past season with his target share on a per game basis. He almost had a 35% target share. That's unheard of. It legitimately is unheard of, and it shows that the only thing the Rams have going for them on the offensive side of the ball is Cooper Kupp, and that is legitimately it. But at the same time, Kupp is now going to be 30 years old. On top of this, we don't really know if Stafford's at 100%. And to go along with this, Las Vegas sportsbooks are telling us that the Los Angeles Rams will be bad this next season. They have their projected win total at about 6.5 games, which is scaring me off just a little bit because this team may be really bad. But if you are just chasing volume, Cooper Kupp most likely will lead the NFL in targets this year if he stays healthy. Just because the Rams are clearly just planning their entire offense around Kupp. Now, going over to our next guy, you would be lower in underdog drafts for us, but keep in mind, underdog, half PPR. Also keep in mind, like we said, you got to push those wide receivers up. And real quick, of course, if you are not already drafting with us, you know we are drafting literally every single day in those underdog best ball drafts. It's best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the year. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 on Underdog last season. And of course, if you want to get in a draft with us, I'll be streaming every single day, not missing a single day until 2024. You can sign up to Underdog with the link in the live chat description or comment section. And if you use promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get all my 2023 fantasy football rankings, as well as a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Plus, that's where all these player props in this video are as well. Same site, both on Underdog Fantasy. But let's go over to our next guy in Austin Ekeler. With Ekeler, he is more appealing in this kind of format because, one, it's a full PPR league, and that's why you're drafting Austin Ekeler. You are drafting Ekeler based off his receiving down usage because as a rusher, he's not giving you much, right? I mean, as a rusher, he's going out there and averaging about 50% of his team's carries on a per game basis. But going back to what we were talking about with CMC, it just simply doesn't really matter if you're looking at Austin Ekeler because the man is a force in the receiving game as well as a touchdown scoring machine. Now, I am a little bit worried about Ekeler's usage as a pass catcher this next season, and I think that the Los Angeles Chargers may not have to lean as heavily on him as they did a year ago. This is why we don't have Austin Ekeler ranked number 1 overall, because he did outscore all of these other guys last season. I think we'll come back down to earth because if we look at the splits with and without some of the key receiving options in this offense, you'll see that when those top receivers went down, they actually leaned a little bit more on Austin Ekeler. For instance, with and without Mike Williams, Austin Ekeler with Mike Williams averaged about 6.5 targets per game. And without Mike Williams, he averaged 10.5 targets per game. That is a massive difference. And we can see the same thing with and without Keenan Allen. In the 10 games played with Keenan Allen, Austin Ekeler averaged about 6.2 targets per game. And in the 7 games without Keenan Allen, Austin Ekeler averaged about 9.5 targets per game. So clearly what you're seeing is when the Los Angeles Chargers are lacking overall receiving weapons, they are kind of forced to go through and look a little bit more to Austin Ekeler. Now, you add in Quentin Johnston, and with the presumed health of Keenan Allen as well as Mike Williams all this next season, plus the fact that Austin Ekeler is now pushing 28, there are red flags with this profile. But of course, you can't completely fade him. I mean, he was the number 1 overall scoring flex player this past season, so you just have to be reasonable with where you rank him in his true range of outcomes. Now, going over to our next guy, I understand I am very biased with Bijan Robinson. I mean, hell, we got to interview him at the NFL draft. I am a former Texas Longhorn, so I'm going to be extremely biased. I mean, this is the only thing the Longhorns had to be excited about for a very long time. I mean, he goes as a true freshman, averages 8.2 yards per carry, shows that he has the talent immediately. Then as a sophomore, he goes ahead and shows that he is a phenomenal receiver. He averages about 30 receiving yards on a per game basis as a true sophomore at Texas. In year 3, he goes out there and just dominates with volume, and the man has legitimately almost 300 total touches. He goes, tests well at the combine. He goes top 10 in the NFL draft, and the only player since 2014 to score as high as Bijan Robinson in our running back prospect model were Leonard Fournette, Saquon Barkley. Barkley's rookie season, he was the running back 2. Leonard Fournette's rookie season, he was the running back 7. And what's the most exciting thing about Bijan Robinson is the landing spot he finds himself with the Atlanta Falcons. We saw Tyler Algier at the end of his rookie season go out there and be a league-winning running back. Crazy to say it, but Tyler Algier was winning playoff matchups for people last season. Tyler Algier, not that talented of a running back. But the reason he was able to do it is Arthur Smith wants to lead the NFL in carries. You go back to his time at Tennessee as the offensive coordinator. He's the 7th team in carries. Then in 2020, he was the 2nd leading team in carries. 2021, the Atlanta Falcons had literally nobody at the running back position. So I feel like we can kind of throw that out the window. But as the head coach in 2022, the Atlanta Falcons with a pseudo committee of Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier were 2nd in the NFL in carries. Now that you move on from Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier and you give them Bijan Robinson, Bijan could reasonably lead the NFL at the running back position in touches as a rookie. Now, going over to our next guy, super safe option, right? Assuming he plays in Buffalo this next year. Stefon Diggs has had 3 back-to-back seasons as a top 10 wide receiver. Stefon Diggs dominates with his target share in Buffalo. The man's averaged 27% of his team's targets on a per-game basis over the past 3 years. Every single season, he's had a yards per route run over 2. Every single season, he has had over 100 intended air yards per game. So Stefon Diggs is just an incredibly safe pick. You know that he is in play to be a top 1 to 2 wide receiver any given week. So yeah, I mean, there's not too much to discuss with Diggs, right? The main thing is he happy in Buffalo? Is he really going to be stirring up some nonsense? I think he's probably just going to play in Buffalo this next year. Now, our next guy, CeeDee Lamb, is ascending. He has not seen the same quality finish as Stefon Diggs, but he's just gotten better every single season. This is a wide receiver that goes from 58 receiving yards per game to 68 and then to 80 this past year. He goes from the wide receiver 31 to the wide receiver 16 to the wide receiver 7. He is still incredibly young. I mean, Kenny Pickett is a second-year player, and CeeDee Lamb is younger than Kenny Pickett. If you're going to go ahead and look into CeeDee Lamb's first 2 years, according to Rotoviz, the only wide receivers that were the same statistically by going ahead and looking at about 15% of a similar window were DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham Jr., Mike Evans, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson. Now, what we did for that is we looked at 22-year-old wide receivers in their 22-year-old and 23-year-old season and moved those marks by 15%. That's elite company there, ladies and gentlemen. What makes this even more impressive is that you had CeeDee Lamb playing some games without Dak Prescott this past year. With Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb went out there and averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game compared to without Dak Prescott only at 16.5. So assuming that we get a fully healthy Dak Prescott this next year, it can be even more impressive. Now, we are going to have him ahead of A.J. Brown. With A.J. Brown, maybe you see some more touchdown volatility just because he's in a much better offense. A.J. Brown, in general, a more efficient wide receiver, right? Like if you're looking at the average over the past 3 years in terms of yards per route run, A.J. Brown is right at the top of the NFL with 2.7, 2.8. But what you have to be a little concerned with Brown is this is a team that wants to run the ball, right? You also have Devonta Smith. You also have Dallas Goedert. So you do have some serious target competition here. Let me know if you think we should have A.J. Brown over Lamb. I just see Lamb as that ascending player, right? And I feel like A.J. Brown's kind of plateaued. Now, our next guy, Saquon Barkley, checks a lot of the boxes that we look for with a league-winning running back. This past year, he had over 60% of his team's carries on a per-game basis. He had a target share about 15% as well. So he's used as a rusher, as we would like to see. He's used as a pass catcher, as we would like to see. And he's still in the age range that we are looking for. Y'all know in general, I'm getting worried about running backs when they're 27, 28. But when they're 26, there's really no reason to be concerned based off what we've historically seen. Now, obviously, it just comes down to the contract situation and what you're going to have with Saquon Barkley. If you were playing in a non-PPR format, I think you can move Barkley down a little bit. You could probably move him down past Chubb, probably down past Taylor, but this is for a full PPR league, of course. Now, our next guy will be Jonathan Taylor. We're going to have him ahead of Nick Chubb in that full PPR format. And very similar to Saquon Barkley, with Jonathan Taylor, he's coming off a season where he saw 67% of his team's carries on a per-game basis. Also, over 10% of his team's receiving targets on a per-game basis as well. So he has the market share numbers that we look for. Not only does he have the market share numbers we look for, but at the same time, he's in that prime age range. Now, the issue is, one, Anthony Richardson, as a rushing quarterback, probably is not going to check the ball down very often. But it's not like Jonathan Taylor makes his bread and butter there, as long as Taylor can be a hyper-efficient rusher. But two, just in general, we don't know how good this Indianapolis Colts team will be this next year with Anthony Richardson. If you're looking at Las Vegas win totals, Vegas sportsbooks essentially have the Indianapolis Colts as a borderline top 5 team this next year, which will worry me just a little bit. But I think that's all we have for this video. Again, thank you so much for being a member of the flock and checking this out. If you have not done so already, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you want to check out all those player props you saw on the screen in this video. If you want to get in a draft with us, we are drafting every single day on Underdog Fantasy. You can sign up with the link in the live chat description comment section. Use promo code FLOCK and they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. Plus, you'll get my 2023 fantasy football rankings, a free trial to flockfantasy.com. It's best ball, so no time commitment at all during the year. So I drafted 700 teams and won $150,000 on Underdog last season. That's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you, and really hope we get to see you out with the live stream later today.